Good morning to everybody, or good afternoon, depending upon where you are. My name is Laura Musikansky. I'm the Executive Director of the Happiness Initiative, and this is our first webinar, free webinar and our online talk for 2013. We're very pleased that we're starting with Tom Barefoot of GNHUSA. Will give his bio in a moment. The origins of these calls come from a meeting that was held at the United Nations in April of last year, where Tom and I were both had the great pleasure and honor of being part of the civil society working group, where we were tasked by the United Nations and the government of Bhutan to launch a global happiness and well-being movement at a grassroots level. So this is a non-funded, I would say a heart-funded global happiness and well-being movement, and to spread that. So this is part of spreading that work. We have these calls monthly, although this month we'll have another call next week. These webinars monthly, and then we have calls where we work together and network together every other week. And if you're interested in joining one of those, let Tom or myself know. I'll put our emails on the question and answer. There's more information about these calls, and I'm putting them in the question box, which now the next thing we'll talk about in terms of the logistics are the questions and how you can ask questions and raise your hand. So this call will be about 30 minutes. Tom will talk, and then we'll have question and answer. If you have a headset and microphones, you can raise your hand in your control box, and I can unmute you so we can hear your voice when you're asking your question. If you don't, you could put your question or your comment into the question or the chat box, and then I'll moderate that question for you. I just put the link to future talks in there, and I'll be shortly putting Tom and my email in there if you're interested in. There's a few different things that you can do. You can get a recording of this webinar, as well as the slides. We'll be putting those up on Basecamp, and you can also be invited to our networking calls that happen every other week. Okay, so let's get started. Tom Barefoot is the co-founder of GNHUSA, and for 20 years was the president of Universal Microsystems. GNHUSA and Tom were instrumental in getting the Vermont legislature to use the Genuine Progress Indicator Plus, with the plus being a subjective indicator of well-being. And very, very, very honored and happy to have him speak today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Tom, and I'm going to be muting myself so that we have cleaner sound. So go
ahead. Well, hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be sharing the work of GNHUSA, because talking about happiness makes one happy. I have two goals for today. One is to discuss a little bit about what Gross National Happiness USA is doing as an organization, and a little bit of what we have done over the last 4+ years. And then just drill in specifically to what we call Vermont as a lab, where we've been working, as Laura said, with the legislature, got a bill passed last spring, working with a number of partner organizations to have the states start to use the Genuine Progress Indicator, which is another one of the indicator sets in the rather large family of well-being indicators. So I'm going to jump in, and can someone indicate whether they can see the slide okay?
Tom, this is Laura. I'll have people say that, and if you could put that in the chat or the question box, but I can see the slides, so I'm attending right now, so you're good. I think you're good to go.
Okay. So Gross National Happiness USA started over 4 years ago. We consider ourselves to be a network of networks. That is, we connect with other organizations who are doing work in their own areas or internationally, and try to just pass information across those networks, mostly through our websites. We currently have 3 websites going. Our main one is GNHUSA.org. There's a second one which was started for the Happiness Walk, which I'll explain a little later, and a third one for the Vermont as a Lab, something we call Measuring What Matters VT. And that's about the local work going on with indicators and measuring well-being. So a resource hub, we're trying to throw everything we find that's interesting into the blog section or a resource section up on the website where people can find that, use that, save time looking for stuff. Lots of links there, lots of video links there. We're about 3 weeks overdue on launching a brand new website, so keep checking back at GNHUSA.org. There will be a new website there within a week or so, we hope. Okay. And so what is gross national happiness? As we discovered when we first encountered these ideas coming sort of directly out of Bhutan, we've tried to live with them, and we've tried to really work on language. Some of you may be familiar with the conundrum of are we talking about happiness? Are we talking about well-being? Are we talking about quality of life? What is this? And it's different things for different people. So we found that it seems very important for people working in this area to spend enough time to clarify the terms and the meanings and sort of the different nuances of some of these things. We had an experience a month ago at a New Economics Conference where we were speaking. We had a workshop on alternative indicators, and we're talking about GNH and happiness and so forth. And this one old German guy just couldn't take that. He said, but I don't want happiness in my life. I want something serious. And it was a very interesting thing. It took a little while for us to find the right words so that he could understand that we were serious and that well-being was actually something that almost everybody wanted. I mean, some people may want to beat themselves with a stick, but he eventually got there. But it was a good reminder that we aren't all on the same basic idea of what happiness is. So we've come up with a concept where we think that gross national happiness includes a family of ideas, and beneath those ideas there are values, and that as we work to sort of change how society sees these things, we have to get to the value level and talk more about that. So I'm just tossing out a few of the ideas. There are many more that I think we need to develop and sort of understand if you're going to talk to people about GNH stuff. One of them is what you measure is what you get. We can thank Joseph Stiglitz for that comment. But again, what that's saying is if you measure something and feed the results of that back, then in a complex system you can create feedback loops that will either diminish or accelerate some particular process that's going on in the system. But if you don't measure it at all, if all you get is GDP numbers and what the Dow Jones did, then maybe you don't really know what's going on in your community. The next one is measure what matters. That one immediately begs the question of, well, what matters? And it's a great conversation starter if you're talking to people about what is this happiness stuff, this well-being stuff. Well, what really matters to your life? And then the best things in life aren't things. And this gets to the idea that one of the things that happens when we start to look at what are the sources of happiness are that we start to move from sort of material orientation, oh, more stuff, new car, bigger TV, more money, to things that are not material like that. And these immaterial things are spending time with family and friends, volunteering, being involved in a task that's greater than oneself, just enjoying a walk in the woods. There are many things in life that are tangibly and you can scientifically show increase your well-being. substantially, but that don't require stuff or diminishing the planet's resources in order for you to feel increased well-being. And of course, if you think about that in the terms of sustainability, one of the things we really want to do is get people to get their satisfaction from multiple places, not just buying stuff as in the Western pseudoculture of advertising. There's a lovely example of this that came from Buckminster Fuller probably in the 1960s or so. He used to say, if I have $1 and you have $1 and you give me your dollar and I give you my dollar, we each have $1. But if you have an idea and I have an idea and you give me your idea and I give you my idea, then we each have 2 ideas. Okay, so the next one is everyone seeks happiness. Well, uh, everyone except that German guy and maybe some of his cousins. Uh, and the idea we are all on Spaceship Earth together. That we're all one family in some sense, and we're all certainly um, on board the spaceship or Earth. And at the moment, we can't get very far off it, so we are all together. And the last one I listed here was just the concept of enough. What is enough? When do you have enough? Enough stuff, enough time, enough health, enough. What is enough? Something again that's a good conversation piece. So Joseph Stiglitz and the Stiglitz Commission in France. Time is right for our measurement system to shift emphasis from measuring economic production, that's GDP, to measuring people's well-being. Okay, so way back in 2008, 6 of the 66 Westerners that attended a GNH conference in Bhutan came from Vermont. Linda Wheatley's the second one from the left there. And she became a co-founder of GNHUSA. The following year, we all went off to Brazil, and there were 4 of us from Vermont amongst the 800 or so that attended the 5th International GNH Conference in Brazil. And this is Karma Chittam speaking at the first GNH USA conference in Burlington, Vermont in 2010. And we had speakers from all over. John DeGraff attended, and Dr. Susan Andrews from Brazil, and Karma from Bhutan, and Ron Coleman from Canada. So we had many others. We had a really good and in-depth 3-day conference followed by a 1-day ambassador training. And the ambassador training, the idea that Laura has really developed nicely is a training that teaches people those basic GNH ideas, how to talk about this, how to spark conversation in groups, and how to sort of get these ideas infused into the civil society in a very practical and transformative way. This is at the April 2nd UN high-level meetings that kicked off these webinars and the phone conferences we've been having, and a good deal of work. This was very inspiring to me in particular because what I saw there were a lot of really caring, bright people from around the world who came together, realizing that the UN itself was not having much of an effect on sustainability and so forth with the Rio Plus 20 work. And I felt like these were people who were saying, okay, we're really not getting too much help from governments, not too much help from the UN on moving this stuff forward. So we, the people, will have to move things forward. We will have to put our brains together and our hearts together and see what we can do to bring change from the ground up and to develop the ideas in a new economic paradigm that will enable us to actually make progress, genuine progress on our planet. So this time we had, I think, 8 board members and the Prime Minister of Bhutan at the UN meetings, and So we're growing over time. You can see that anyway. And everyone, our board got really inspired by going to these meetings, and so we've been seeing how we can contribute to that process since then and staying plugged in. This is our GNHUSA 2012 conference, which was in June, late May, early June. The Vermont Genuine Progress Indicator is something that we had worked on with the Gund Institute for Ecological Economics, who are one of our partners up here in Vermont. They're one of the organizations that have developed the GPI over many years and helped Maryland develop its GPI, which is a very visible and easy to understand system. They have a great website, which we'll look at a little bit later. And this conference was titled Measuring What Matters. And what it did was it brought together 140 data people from across the state of Vermont, some from state government, some from nonprofits. We actually had 4 agency directors who came for the day, not for a photo shoot, but who came to participate in and understand how we could all work together, how we could collaborate to make a sort of a Vermont data portal and to fill in gaps in data and figure out who had what data where. All of that work that needs to be done. So it's a very exciting area where we can help lead a collaborative of people who have data and who get very excited when they find out that you have some other data and you know a third person who's got some great data, and start to make it available to nonprofits and social agencies and so forth. Again, another shot of the conference. We spent the morning in sort of plenaries, and the afternoon we broke into working groups by the domains, asking people that had expertise in those areas to come join in and sit down. And we started a process of trying to come up with questions for questionnaires and other indicators that would help elucidate each of the domains. And we see that as an ongoing process where we put some people that were interested focused on coming up with the Vermont data for the Genuine Progress Indicator work, and other groups are going to be working in the future on the GNH domains to fill those in and again help us all get a better picture of what these things are and how we can express them to other people and other groups. One other thing that happened was Paula and Linda Wheatley, Linda's one of the other co-founders and the other co-coordinator with myself, and Paula Francis is one of the very early members of GNHUSA here. And they decided that they needed to hear what the people had to say about what was important to them. So this summer and into early October, they walked from Stowe, Vermont to Washington, D.C., which is about 600 miles, just the two of them, no support vehicles, no nothing. They just walked. They made arrangements to stay with people, or if they couldn't find anybody, they usually stopped in a cafe or something until somebody would take them home and get them going from the next night. So they made it all the way to Washington in 6 weeks. And all along the way, they talked to people about the pursuit of happiness and what does happiness mean to them and what's important to them and to their families. And not surprisingly, everyone was really interested in talking about that. So they have some recordings, they have a little bit of video, they're transcribing all of this, there will be a book, and it's a good story. But it did reinforce that idea, and we'll be feeding back some of the results that they got from talking to people about what was important to the ordinary people. Of course, this was going through there not too in the early fall before Sandy came and made a mess of where they walked, which is to say through Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, a little bit of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and on down. So what is it? We have this sort of standard picture that there's high GDP man with expensive tastes and fancy this and that. And we have low GDP man who's got a smile on his face and is enjoying life. And this is the Happy Peasants, Miserable Millionaires uh, work that Carol Graham has done, and pointing out to us that you don't have to be rich to be happy. Uh, One of the things that we see is that this process has taken us from looking at GDP as the main set of indicators, the main thing that we look at and used to use to define development and how well we're doing. Well, if we look at expanding sort of circles here, we move outward and start adding economic well-being and include leisure time and non-market activity. We move further out and we start to get quality of life, and we get the environment and health. Inequality comes in there, education. When we get further out and we start getting to happiness and family activities, friends, work satisfaction, community ties, trust. Uh, so what we've really done in this process is start to take people on a journey to looking at a wider and wider set of things that make our lives happy and healthy. And these are the 9 domains of happiness, which came from the Happiness Initiative work Laura's been doing. And now there's a 10th one of quality of work life. And our experience so far is that the 9 domains that came from the Bhutanese work are pretty good, that they do a good job of sort of covering the terrain of happiness and well-being. But there may be differences for different cultures, and it may be that we want to split some of them into 2. For example, community vitality is often related to connectedness to the community, trust in the community, safety in the community. And up here in Vermont, we refer to community vitality as kind of, is there an engine? Is there energy in the community? Is the community building new jobs and creating better lifestyles for people? And so that's something we may over time find that this evolves a bit to get clearer and clearer, or maybe be a better fit in different cultures. And the inequality thing clearly becomes more interesting as we look at what the cost of inequality is. And you see the USA way up an outlier at the top, which is worse, and you're better in the lower left and worse as you move out toward the upper right. You can see all those terrible things on the left that you get more of as inequality increases. So it becomes interesting in a discussion with people to be able to show data that suggests that it doesn't just matter to the individuals that are affected, but the whole society is affected when there are high levels of income inequality. And the great book and website on that is The Spirit Level. So if you haven't looked at that, that's a very valuable resource. Of course, we wonder about money, and we're probably all familiar with the idea that you need a certain amount of money. It's kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the bottom, when you start up, you need a certain amount of stuff, certain amount of money before you feel that you're doing okay. And at that point, the effect of increased money or increased resources starts to fade, that your well-being, it flattens, it becomes flat, and you get your satisfaction and your well-being from other things. You start to get it from job satisfaction, you start to get it from contributing in a bigger project, from volunteering, from spending time with family and friends. I did a workshop in a public vocational high school with some young teenagers who were very untalkative about, you know, what made them happy or what was important to them, until one young man finally said, what I like best is spending time with my grandmother. And then everybody just sort of started to jump in, and they said, yes, it's really important for us to have time with our family, and that really feels good, and that's one. And so it's in there. So how much is enough? Well, there was a study done on that, and I think it was Diener and all. There was 450,000 people across the world, and in the U.S., the final figure, what you need to be happy, we like to joke that it's the price of happiness in the U.S. is $75,000 a year for a family of four. So that's not too bad. It's, you know, the median is down around 50, I think. Uh, so we like to think and jokingly suggest that, well, this is great. This number tells us what the minimum wage should be. So if everybody had that, they'd all be pretty happy. And then they could spend time on the other things that bring happiness. So what is it that GNHUSA does? Well, Clearinghouse for Information, the survey tools, which we're really working with Laura and the Happiness Initiative, using the tools that they've developed and hopefully helping to develop them further, as well as using the Genuine Progress Indicator, which is not a survey, but is a periodic assessment that the state of Vermont's going to be doing. They're GNH policy analysis tools, which we've started to introduce the idea to the Vermont state government and to organizations, that they can take some of these same questions and some of these same ideas and use them as a checklist when they're debating policy and thinking about something. It's kind of like a happiness environmental impact statement. It's a happiness impact statement, which enables us to figure out, or at least make intelligent guesses as to what effects a new program might have in the community. And then we have community discussions in action, conversation cafes, something we call happiness circles, which are sit around your kitchen, sit around in your church, sit around in a cafe, and talk about this stuff. And then more focused, I guess, is if we can do surveys in communities, we can do report outs and discuss those results with the members of the community and help them figure out what they want to do to improve well-being in their communities. This was a preliminary survey that we did using the first version of the Happiness Initiative survey in 2011. Vermont shows up there in the middle. We were seriously bent out of shape by noticing that the scores for Decorah, Iowa were in general better than Vermont, which at least likes to think of itself as being the land of milk and honey, or at least milk and maple syrup. And I had to do some research to find out why Decorah, Iowa was doing so well. It turns out it's a small college town in the Midwest. They have sort of farming culture around them. It's quiet, it's peaceful, and obviously pretty happy. This is the Gallup Healthways poll, which is very interesting information, which you can find on all states and almost all countries for the last several years. I think they do 130 countries, and they do 1,000 people surveys in each state each year and produce a set of numbers that allows you to do some comparison year over year. We found that the numbers are rather volatile, so I'm not quite trusting in their stability, but they're certainly a useful set of information. We can take, again, this is taking Gallup data. We can start to look at counties and just see distributions of different things. Well, depressed is not happy probably, so that tells us something about different counties. It might tell you where you want to live and where you don't want to live, or where there's work that needs to be done. So these are the policy and program tools, or those checklists to evaluate the effect on well-being across the 9 domains. And by repeating the survey over time, we'll start to see the actual effects of the policy or program on people in the communities. And one of our other collaborators, the Benchmarks for a Better Vermont, is bringing in something called results-based accountability by Mark Friedman, excuse me, who has developed this system for outcome evaluation of nonprofits or agencies working with client populations. And we're working with them to help them start to use well-being indicators for those tests, so that an organization might apply for a grant, say we're going to work with adolescents, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we expect that certain outcomes will improve, that their physical health scores will go up over time, that their mental health scores will go up over time. Whatever it is, there will be goals with measurable indicators that measure what actually happened in the community. Was there really change in people in the community, or was it just 300 hours worth of work that was delivered to X number of people and nothing changed? So we think that's very exciting because it's the beginning of working out how to actually use these things in the real world. And the state of Vermont has adopted results-based accountability. They actually used it 20 years ago, and then a Republican governor came along and canceled all the funding for the data gathering and killed that for a bunch of years. Anyway, this gives us a chance to start to think about best practices and how it is that we're actually going to use these indicators to indicate sustainable progress and indicate where changes need to be made. Other measures, I like to just talk about these. There are two mathematicians at the University of Vermont who've been taking real-time feeds from Twitter. Since the beginning of Twitter, they've had a direct line into the main Twitter servers. And so they're able to look for key emotive words in millions and millions of Twitter feeds every day. So they have a real-time chart for the whole planet. You can pick what area, what time frame, and you can see how people are feeling, or at least how they're expressing themselves, by the change in the emotional laden words that they're using at particular times. And they've started to do that against other kinds of databases too, like all of the New York Times has now been scanned and is available as text all the way back to the more than 100 years. So we see that on, also there was an iPhone survey in the UK that people could subscribe to. It would just ring your iPhone every now and then and ask you 3 or 4 questions. And it would also check with the GPS to figure out where you were at the time. Were you in a park? Were you at work? Were you on a bus? So forth. And trying to get a little bit of place information about your happiness or well-being level as you self-reported it. And yes, the happiest time of the week is Saturday around 8 p.m., at least in the UK. Something is happening here. These are some interesting trends that again came from Gallup data. And you can see the usual indicator, GDP per capita, is going up and up and up, and over time. But thriving. The well-being is going down and down and down. And this is for Egypt. Here's another graph from Tunisia. And we see the same thing. GDP per capita goes up, percent thriving goes down. And so we ask ourselves, what happened in those two places? Oh, they had revolutions last year. And we're prompted immediately to learn from the data. And one of the things we can probably guess and could probably prove out if we were to look more deeply is that increase in per capita GDP may not have been quite as rosy as it looked. If we looked at the inequality of the distribution of that, we might well find that the top couple of percent or so got most of that, and almost everybody else was flat or going down. So here's a slightly older, but a very similar looking graph where GDP per head of household is increasing, but the percent very happy is falling. Oh, this is for the US. Okay, one other thing that we did was Pursuit of Happiness Day, which is Thomas Jefferson's birthday. This is something that Laura and John and the Happiness Initiative came up with. We decided this was a lovely idea last year, so we sponsored teach-ins and discussions and various activities. This year, we're going to try to go from the International Day of Happiness all the way to Earth Day with events every day in between. I personally think that's ambitious, but our crowd seems to want to go for something big. This, by the way, is the governor did a proclamation on our behalf for Pursuit of Happiness Day, and it's really quite nice. So in order to raise awareness of our responsibility to create happiness and to increase opportunities for people to share and discuss ideas about how to build more happiness into our futures and the future of Vermont. Now, therefore, I, Peter Shumlin, Governor, do hereby proclaim April 13th, 2012, the anniversary of President Jefferson's birth as Pursuit of Happiness Day in Vermont. We had a college professor in Burlington at a American flatbread pizza and brewery place at a happy hour of all things that he'd arranged. He read this out loud and got a standing ovation from the crowd. Anyway, we had discussions at a couple of universities, and this is starting to spread around the world as an event. The other thing, our project is Vermont as a Lab, is to test and implement well-being measures and develop best practices. We figured that before we went out and started talking to legislators and so forth about how good this stuff was and they should use it, that we better figure out A, how to use it, and B, be able to demonstrate that it's good and it works and how to do it. So we started doing this, and then along came an effort to pass a genuine progress indicator bill last year, which is like GDP, but on to that you add, I'm just going to pass through here quickly and get to this, which is Maryland's genuine progress indicator, which is essentially the same variables as Vermont's, is it takes things that come from a GDP number and then it subtracts the costs, the environmental costs and things like that. You cut down a forest, you sell the firewood. Oh, but now you've lost the ecosystem services of gathering, preserving the water, cleaning the air, habitat for animals, and so forth. And it adds things which were not added before, like the value of housework, the value of volunteerism, the value of restoring wetlands, and so forth. So it's producing a truer set of accounts. We're hoping that we'll use it by adding what we call GPI notes to a bill. As it comes in, it has language and says what it's going to do. And currently, there's a fiscal note which says what it's going to cost. Well, we're hoping to train up people in the advocacy organizations and in the state and in the legislature to learn how to create a GPI statement which will include these added well-being and health of the economy, the environment, and social indicators. Anyway, take a look at Maryland's GPI work. And I'm going to stop here and we'll switch to questions. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Tom. It was really, really interesting. I'd love to hear more personally about what you're doing in Vermont with the Vermont legislature, but at this point, you can ask a question if you have a headset with your microphone. Just raise your hand and I'll unmute you so that you can ask the question online. If not, please just go ahead and put your question into the question box on your control panel. So we'll take a moment here and wait for questions. We have about 20 minutes. And if not, Tom, if you could show us the other slides that you didn't go through about what's happening in Vermont, that would be lovely.
Sure.
Okay, so nothing's come up yet. So if you'll go ahead and do that, that'd be great.
Okay, one of the key things that we did, and I'll take Laura's question too about saying what we did more with the legislature, is we formed something called the Vermont Data Collaborative, which is 4 organizations led by GNHUSA and funded by a $20,000 grant from the Vermont Community Foundation. 4 organizations are GNHUSA, the Gunn Institute for Ecological Economics at UVM, Benchmarks for a Better Vermont, which is doing the results-based accountability work in Vermont, and Common Good Vermont, which is an organization that works to strengthen the capacity of nonprofits. And we all found considerable overlap in the idea of alternative indicators and of helping their constituent organizations to um, learn how to use them in a practical sense. When we had been speaking with one of the progressive state senators, Anthony Polina, about GNH and about GPI and just these general alternative indicator things late in the fall of 2011. And early in January, we have a citizen legislature here that meets from middle of January to the middle of May. And we were invited to come to a press conference they were giving at the State House and about announcing a bill for a genuine progress indicator for Vermont. So this was like a total surprise to us, and it was one of those oh my God moments. We better get geared up and deal with this if this is people are going to be asking questions about this stuff. So we jumped in, we started getting other organizations we had connections to, explaining these concepts to them, how they used them. Initially, people had not a clue what a genuine progress indicator was or GNH indicators. And gradually we educated the legislator, and they went from, you know, what is this silly idea to, oh, we get it. And over the course of the 4-month legislative session, we attended many committee meetings and hearings and 2 big votes. First in the Senate, where we had 28 senators in Vermont. We only had 1 vote against it, and toward the end of the session, in one of those kind of last-minute things, will they get to it before the session ends? We managed to push and push and push and get them to get it into the legislative calendar, and that won by about a 2/3 in favor. So it was overwhelming support for this. And we had great support from the state treasurer and the various fiscal groups, that's the Joint Fiscal Office that support the legislature. They testified in favor of this. They said they wanted it. They said, no, it won't hurt our bond rating. And so this idea that went from outside the box, what is this stuff, became an actual law and has just been delivered to the state of Vermont on the 15th. So we've yet to see how it lands and how it's received. And right now we're sort of obsessing about how is it that we're going to support this, how are we going to educate the legislators and the advocacy organizations. And so we're thinking about both broad training, and we're working with our data collaborative to develop data literacy education and data visualization education to teach people how to display data, how to read data, how to understand when some politician has been twisting it, and how to correct that. So that's a tall order that we figure is several years worth of work, but we're starting it this spring. And we're also working to pick a couple of advocacy groups that stood with us on the bill passing last year. The Vermont Natural Resources Council is one, for example, Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, and to have them pick a couple of legislative initiatives that they care about, and we'll all help them to develop that GPI report to go with those bills, so that the legislators will start getting used to seeing alternative indicators. There's something called the Governor's Dashboard in Vermont, which again was a surprise to us. We had been talking to the governor about GPI and GNH and so forth, and they finally admitted that they were actually working on a dashboard for the governor. So we expect this and the GPI stuff to gradually meld in over time. But this is quite interesting. You can find it on the governor's website in Vermont. And we looked at that stuff. Do go to the Maryland list, though. That's a pretty interesting
Great.
list. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you. So we've got quite a few questions now. So Don
Okay.
Piper is asking, is there a space, and I'm assuming he means an organization, to help other cities and countries start a GPI initiative? I did type in an answer to him about the Demos Institute and that you're working with them, but if you could go ahead and say more about that.
Yes, there was a meeting last fall with the various states that are working with GPI now. There is no one place to get everything, but that group is starting to act as a community of practice for the GPI. We're more than happy to provide the legislation that passed in Vermont and some tips to people on how to explain this. And there's also, you can go on the web to gpiatlantic.org.ca, which is Ron Coleman's organization in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And they've done work over many years with GPI. They're currently helping New Zealand to integrate it, and the Gund Institute of Ecological Economics at UVM is working on GPI for Vermont and helped Maryland set theirs up, and they're working with Iceland, I believe.
Great. Thank you. Okay, and then our next question is from Professor Lester Kurtz of George Mason University. And his question is, the happiness environmental impact statement is a great idea. Can you say more about how that has been and could be used?
Yes, actually it's very well developed in Bhutan, and on the Center for Bhutan Studies website, you should be able to find their policy tools. And also Michael Pennock in GNH Canada has developed a westernized set of policy tools for that. And it's really, you can imagine, you're really just looking at indicators for each of the domains, particularly ones that are affected by the type of a decision that you're coming up with. You can imagine, for example, the Minister of Forests and the Minister of Transportation having to work out whether you're going to put a road through this nice forest or not. There are different needs and so forth, and if you can sort of get that out on paper and try to determine the total effect on well-being, hopefully people will make better decisions.
Great, thank you. Um, okay, so the next question is from Marilyn Winter Tompkin, who's a board member of Emerging Diplomacy in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And she says, many thanks for this presentation, Tom. Are people who do data analysis available outside Vermont? What surveys did you find most useful?
I think the answer to what survey is work in progress. I think we're still looking at surveys. We've been using the Happiness Initiative's online survey. We want to take a regular telephone randomized baseline for the state of Vermont, which is something we're planning to do this winter. And we're looking at the survey, and we've got some help and some input from Carol Graham, who's on a national panel, the National Institutes of Science, that are making recommendations to the U.S. Census Bureau, which looks like it will be including some basic well-being questions like the UK, 4 questions of about how would you rate your general well-being sort of thing. So I think we've gotten some help from the folks who've developed the survey that Happiness Initiative uses, and we'll be working more with Laura and trying to hone what it is that we're going to do. But again, I would say if you're going to do telephone surveys, that's one thing. If you're going to do online surveys where you get the data back from Happiness Initiative, which is done by getting a code from them, and we can facilitate that to some extent too. But I think that's the answer at the moment. Brazil has developed one based on Michael Pennock's work, which was he was involved in the original creation of Bhutan's original survey. So state of flux, hasn't all settled out yet, but this one seems to be the best one that's out there right at the moment.
Right, and I want to jump in here and say that there's going to be essentially two tracks to developing a subjective indicator of well-being that supersedes the single use of the one objective measure of our questionable well-being, gross domestic product or profitability. And that's the two tracks will be the experts tracks and the grassroots tracks. So one of the things that we really wanted to see happen at the Happiness Initiative is what we called the Happiness Collaboratory, where we could find a way of gathering all of the data that's out there, that's both gathered in a grassroots or opt-in manner, as well as in scientifically based surveys such as Gallup and the European Social Survey, and then develop collaboratively what does that measure look like that will supersede GDP. And key to this, absolutely key to this, is collaborating together and understanding that we're really changing the culture, we're changing the mean. So we're looking forward at the Happiness Initiative to working with Tom on this and are very interested in working with others who want to make this shift change. And Tom, if you don't mind, I'll just say something about the Happiness Index survey that's available on Happy Counts. Anybody can use that at any scale. And the idea is that as we're using that, and there's other people on this call I see who are using this, and we are talking about how we can further develop this. So thank you, Tom, and thanks for letting me intercede.
Sure, no, that's great.
Yeah. So the next question is from Josef Schumann. And he said, you mentioned helping organizations measure their progress. As an organization pushing the improvement of metrics, how do you measure the success of GNHUSA?
Well, we're actually in the process of developing a set of indicators based on the results-based accountability model, using some of the well-being indicators to see if we are having an effect on the populations. Now, I guess we have sort of two populations that we're dealing with at the moment. Having adopted the name GNHUSA, it implies, and correctly, that we're hoping to try to help organize things around the USA, not as one single organization, but again as that network of networks. And we also have the Vermont as a lab where we are headquartered and where we've started a bunch of experiments to try and tease out what's going to work for that. In our own organization, we've had many discussions trying to get to the values and figure out what it is that we should really be doing if we want to sow the seeds of change in the broader society. And we're very aware that we need to take our own medicine here and develop a good set of indicators, but I have to admit that that's a work in progress.
Thank you. And I think that's an appropriate statement to say this because this is an emerging field. So that we're defining these as we go along is really important, and to stay that is really important. So thank you, Tom, for your bravery and your courage in making that statement. So we have two more questions. This one is from Brent Ladd. And it said, the slide on happiness and well-being that shows USA as a far worse outlier than any other country, and yet people here have not pushed for a revolution like in Egypt and Tunisia. Why do you think people seem satisfied, quote unquote, satisfied with things in the USA, despite the data that we shouldn't be satisfied?
That's a very big question. And I think my shortest answer would be that the majority of the people are still befuddled by the pseudo-culture, by the advertising and media slants that as long as we're doing okay economically, that's what we really should care about. And and is the latest movie star happy, rather than are the people in my community happy? And I think that what we see is that this is part of the grassroots effort to get people to pay attention to and measure what matters. We often talk about what you hear on the radio, and what you hear on the radio for progress indicators are the Dow Jones, um, maybe GDP every now and then, and unemployment. Did it go up or down? We don't really get the information that we need to make the changes to our society that we need. And I think until we have more discussions and realize that we're actually, this business of buying stuff is actually subverting us from doing what we really want to do, which is, instead of spending time at work making money to buy stuff we don't need to impress neighbors we don't like, that what we really need to be doing is pursuing happiness in some respect and changing what it is that we do with our lives and want to do.
And
I
I'm
don't know,
gonna,
big question,
it is a big
grassroots
question.
answer.
I'm going to put in a plug here for GNHUSA as well as the work that we're doing. Part of our work that we started and had been doing for a long time at the United Nations conference, where we were asked to launch a global happiness and well-being movement, is about educating people. And you can find lots of resources and information on the GNHUSA website that you're invited to use to start giving your own talks, whether that's informal or formal, about what's really happening in our country around happiness and whether or not people are happy. And those conversations can spark people. You can also find there's tools and resources on the Happy Counts website, and you'll see it under Conduct a Happiness Initiative. You'll see tools and resources that you can download and are invited to use. And if you just do a search on happiness, you'll find two different aspects of it. You'll find it on the positive psychology piece, how happy are you feeling, and on this shift of a measurement. Um, so both Tom and I have lots more that we could add on that, but thank you, Tom, for that question, that answer. We have about 3 more minutes, so we're going to take one more question here, and I want to catch that question that was there, and this is from Alexandra Adler, who is a doctoral candidate on positive psychology and working with Martin Seligman, who's the founder of positive psychology and kind of the founder of this subjective well-being movement. And his question is, what are your thoughts about Bhutan's United Nations initiative on well-being and happiness as a global economic paradigm?
I actually think this is exactly the right thing to be doing, because I think that at the core is everybody's sort of innate desire for happiness, except for those few Germans. And that it bypasses a lot of the negative framing that we've gotten into in our political discourse here, and that in order to make progress in any sphere, whether it's in the formal UN sphere, in the sort of informal grassroots UN movement that we've been a part of through here, and through starting to incorporate a lot of the research that we see, that we need to surface this. We need to change the discussion. We need to ground it in something that's experienced by people rather than is just theoretical. And I think that all of the research that's going on in the positive psychology field has really helped embolden a lot of scientists and others to feel like that this stuff is real, it's solid, we can replicate it, we can prove it, and we're knowing more and more how to make people happier. And so the question then becomes, why aren't we doing those things? And I think that as we talk about it, we'll start to do it, and people have to just start to do it.
Great. Thank you. And we don't have room for any other questions, but you essentially answered the last question by Leslie Nord of whether this should be a grassroots or a top-down approach, and we need both. So thank you so much, Tom. Our next our next talk is actually going to be next week. We have two this week. It's with the Jens Jardel, and he'll be speaking on the paradigm shift for global happiness. So please dial in for that. If you have suggestions for people to give calls, I'm sorry, I keep saying calls. If you have suggestions for people to give talks or would like to give one yourself, please email me. That's laura@happycounts.org. These talks are recorded and the slides are available if you join our base camp, and you can do that by emailing either Tom or myself, and you'll have access to base camp, which will also give you access to our networking twice a month calls where we talk about what we're doing as organizations, as individuals, and how we can support each other in this. So with that, we're right at the hour. So thank you very much to everybody. I'm going to unmute people, which can cause complete chaos in terms of the noise, but it allows you to say goodbye. So I'll just unmute people as we're going down the line to say goodbye. So thank you to everybody. There we go.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day. You should have shout out to John if you have a microphone on you. Or to Tom if you have a microphone on you.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye,
Bye.
Graciela.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you. It was great.
Good, thank you.
All right, there we go. Everybody's unmuted. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank
And
you
I'll
from
be
Washington.
Thank you.
Thanks from Canada.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Oh,
Thanks
thank
again.
Yep.
you.
all right. Happy day,
Thank,
everybody.
okay,
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
thanks
Bye.
for organizing it, Laura.
Bye.